as we all know, the linear consumption model has got to change. And it's changing already. We are moving towards a circular economy where we share instead of own, we offer services instead of ownership. Well, we should start with the basics. What do Karma and Grover do, and what sparked the idea behind your companies? You can start, Elsa. It's your birthday after all.
Thank you. The privilege of having a birthday. So Karma started off in a totally different angle than where we are today. Originally, we were a deal platform, and fairly early on, though, we saw that there were a great demand for food deals in particular. And we wondered, why was this so? And also, were there a real problem behind it? Because we saw that restaurants continuously uploaded these food deals. And we asked ourselves, okay, this is interesting, and realized at the time that, the reason behind it was food waste, and just how big of an issue it actually is, that 1/3 of all food produced is thrown away. And at that point, it was pretty obvious for us that, okay, we can actually use this platform to solve this issue and help consumers connect with these restaurants and grocery stores and cafes who have this surplus food and help them sell it for half price. So it wasn't a straight journey in the beginning. We found our way eventually.
Thank you. What about you, Michael?
Sure. So Grover, on a simple level, rents tech. So we rent technology products to consumers on a monthly basis. And on a more complicated level, it's the future of leverage. So we provide the benefits of a pay later option. However, without the disadvantage of indebting people and without the disadvantage of just supporting a linear a business model, with the advantage of giving people flexibility to stop paying whenever they're done using a particular product. And then we are able to recirculate and so forth.
So going circular requires changes in both consumer and customer behavior. I mean, people need to look at these products in a different angle than they used to. How did entering market go for Karma? Was there sort of a pre-existing customer base, or did you feel like you sort of hit the place in the right time?
The customer base have definitely always been there, both on the seller side and on the consumer side. I mean, who doesn't want to make a great deal and at the same time buy great food?
Exactly.
While, contributing for a good cause. But I think we've seen a huge change during these 3 years that we've been operating, where when we started off, it was not at all the same awareness. We did not perceive the industry as conscious and receptive as we do see them becoming now. So it was challenging in the beginning because we need to not only create awareness, we also need to change attitudes and change behaviors, and that takes time.
What about Grover? Was there anything similar in Germany back then?
To Grover?
Yeah.
No, I think the fundamental difference is that there are many companies out there today that rent things maybe on a daily basis or so. And I think what they have misunderstood always in the past is there's a big difference between renting something for a day or two or a week versus allowing monthly long-term rents, which eventually become subscriptions. So there was nothing like that exactly in Germany. And I remember launching in 2015, and people were not very much ready, and not so much on the consumer side. So consumers instantly felt the benefit, but there was a lot of kind of going through questions like, yeah, but I want to own it, and then this is mine, blah, blah. Like, you don't hear much of that anymore these days. So not owning, but paying for usage and so forth has become a common theme amongst many, and it's evolving more and more. So it's clearly that we've embraced on this dematerialization path. Why is something that is possible for immaterial goods like software or entertainment or music, why isn't that same possible for products where the products also provide a particular service? So you see more and more of that happening today and these days, and that's a movement I think that is not ever going to stop.
So it's very much the same for you guys. You need to change the attitude to this and really realize that it's not a bad thing to rent something. It can actually be a win-win for everyone where you, as with us, like you get to buy great food that is still high quality for a lower price. And the sellers, they get to reduce food waste while attracting new customers, increasing their revenues. And all together, we actually create a more sustainable environment.
Yeah,
and I think we're sort of getting that across more and more now. Yeah,
and what will survive or what will succeed, what makes the most sense for the consumers. So eventually people will always vote with the wallet. Like, okay, how do I get the most benefit? And people will realize that the food that they buy at your place at 50% discounts is exactly as good or not, if not better than food purchased elsewhere. So you will succeed. Similarly here, people are realizing and will realize even further in the future that the useful life of a particular product to them may be very different depending on what product they consume, and that after a certain period of time they just want to get rid of it, and that selling and engaging in all of these things is actually quite complicated and time consuming. So they prefer a time constrained, time limited relationship with a particular asset and then just send it back. So that's a usage pattern that is cheaper than owning things, for instance. So this will succeed as well and prevail.
You launched Grover in 2015, right?
Yeah.
What about Karma? When did you launch?
2016.
2016. I see.
In November. So we just turned 3 years.
3 years. So many birthdays.
2 birthdays on one day? Or?
Exactly. 2 birthdays today.
Okay, great.
Exactly. Well, how did you, when you first started sort of persuading your customers, like, do you feel like you were the first ones to sort of drive that change, or do you feel like there was already sort of business in the marketplace?
I mean, we weren't the first ones.
Yeah.
Even though we thought so when we came up with the idea, we were like, oh my God, this is brilliant. We're innovators. But pretty quickly, we realized that there had been people out there who've actually tried to do this before. There was this company trying to do a similar model in New York, I think, in 2011.
Yeah.
They aren't operating anymore, and I think I haven't met them myself, but our hypothesis is that at the time people weren't as aware. I don't think the market was ready. I also think the technology wasn't necessarily there. And I think we as consumers, but also as an industry, weren't really as used to purchasing food through our phones. I think food delivery apps have helped us tremendously to show the industry that these digital platforms can help you actually become a more sustainable and profitable company. So there's been people out there, and I think we've been able to sort of tap into this at the right time.
Exactly. Well, honestly, do you think there is even space or need for startups not operating in circular economy space anymore? Would you be a young founder putting up your first company now? Is it even ethical to, not to follow the circular model anymore?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think many people haven't heard of the word circular economy, or are not when they've found businesses looking for solutions within the circular economy. Or let's put it this way, a particular set of people will do that. So having a circular economy background, one way or the other, will look for opportunities within that. That's one thing. The other set of founders will typically try to solve a problem that's particularly to them. It could be any problem that we today aren't even aware of. However, whatever that solution may be, I think it's the environment we live in today, or the abilities we have today in doing business, are making it quite or penalize a linear business model, because people are aware of the waste that you're producing. Your consumers are a lot more unlikely to do business with you, and they should probably.
Yeah, exactly.
So that there's a big penalty, I would say, to doing business in a bad old way, and that penalty is going to increase. So any founder, I think, that is having or that is engaging in a business model in the old sorts without thinking about the after cycle and how to do business in a good way will have a increased penalty tax applied to that service that she's providing. So it will be very uneconomical eventually. I think it wouldn't make any sense. So it's a topic of this century, or in particular the next decade, is how to do business efficiently. It's an efficiency questions, and I think doing business in a linear way is producing these days externalities that you cannot push to the society, but which will have to priced into the particular business model. So it's pretty uneconomical to do business in a linear, unsustainable, whatever way, as has been done oftentimes in the past.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think?
I fully agree. I think we need to move from this take, make, dispose kind of way of doing business into a circular way of doing business. And I would also, if I would start again, I would look at, where do we have the biggest friction points? Where do we have the problem? Where is waste? Go to the SDG goals and just say, okay, there are these areas which is clearly massive issues. Is this a business opportunity behind this if I solve this? And there are several models out there, similar to Grover and Karma, where you can show that impact and profit doesn't contradict each other. Quite the opposite now. You can actually have an impact, solve massive issues, while creating a highly profitable business. So it is in your interest, not only from an ethical perspective, but also from a business perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what it comes down to. I think it needs to make economic sense for consumers in the first place. Because what we see in Germany, for instance, people say one thing, but they go shopping to Aldi, where the food is the absolute cheapest on the other hand. So people eventually vote with the wallet. So if you can succeed at combining economic advantage to the people with the sustainability advantage to the environment, something that Grover actually is doing, then you have something that's great, that's working, because you have aligned incentives across the board, economic incentives for yourself. For us, reusage of a product, the more often the better. The same as for the consumer. You pay a fraction of the purchase price and so forth. And then eventually for the environment, because we actually do reduce waste and also the production emissions and so forth. If you look at a few slides, which we're finalizing now, but it looks like we're reducing e-waste by a few hundreds or thousands of metric tons every single year, and including also the CO2 production that were to relate into those by recirculating products 5 times or more.
I can just add to that. I fully agree. The economic aspect is really, really crucial, because with our products, even though people really care about the environmental aspect, if it hadn't the economical aspect, I don't think people would have used the platform the same way.
Yeah.
So people say that they care. That's what they will tell you externally, but that's not how they will behave. Because when it comes down to your everyday behavior, it needs to make sense financially. It needs to be frictionless, and then the economic aspect is crucial.
Yeah. So they care when it's sort of suitable for them to care.
And same goes for the sellers. So
yeah, exactly.
They do care. They want to reduce food waste. I mean, there's no business in the world who would say we want to have waste, because that's also a revenue loss for them. But if it's more costly for them to reduce food waste, they never.
Yeah, it's about competitive advantage. If you can have a competitive advantage by doing things a certain way, you will do it as a business. If you can have a budget advantage as a consumer by spending your money a certain way, you will do it. It's just basic economics. And if that translates nowadays to doing things more sustainably, because sustainable ways of doing things are cheaper for businesses, for example, because consumers are internalizing those external costs to those businesses and so forth, then I think this will work.
Well, knowing we most likely have a lot of aspiring young founders in the audience, if you were to give a piece of advice to anyone in the audience thinking about funding a circular economy startup, what do you think you would yourself do? Where do you think the biggest untapped opportunities actually lie in the moment, if you can't pick your own industry, that is?
I mean, of course, I'm incredibly biased. But I do think there are huge opportunities in the food waste space. And,
Would there be like some other ways to deal with food waste than what Karma is doing at the moment?
Wonky fruits and veggie boxes that you can turn into drinks and snacks. We have peer-to-peer solutions where you can actually, save food in the households. We see surplus bread turned into beer. There's a lot of things out there, and that's what I would love to see, like more smart way of actually going from adapting resources to what we want to instead actually looking at the resources we have at hand and ask ourselves, okay, what can we do with what we have available.
Yeah.
So again, I'm incredibly biased, but I still need to make a vote for food waste space.
So yeah, more to be done
But
there.
then in the bigger scope of things, I would again go back to the SDG goals and look at those and just see, okay, which one of these goes mostly in line with my values? What would really, really be valuable for me to work on, and how can I find a way to use technology or whatnot to solve it?
Yeah, for me, I would say ask yourself what could be a service rather than a sale, right? So whatever can be a service is by definition circular, because you're interested in and incentivized to circulate the underlying asset. So it can be mobility, for instance, but it can also be fashion. So whatever dematerializes the underlying asset and decouples the product from the service that it provides, and if you can make that service the business, you're very likely to embark on a circular economy journey.
Well, going a bit more philosophical here, what do you think is a core purpose of circular economy startup? Is it to be profitable? Is it to scale fast? Let's say if we are ever so successful, we run out of food waste. What is Karma's purpose then? What do you think is the sort of actual deep purpose of a circular economy startup? Is it different to the one of linearity?
I can't speak for all the other companies. In our case, when I met with my current co-founders, we're four, we all share the vision that we wanted to use technology to have a massive impact at a global scale to solve one of the world's biggest issues. That's sort of what we said, and that could mean quite a lot. So I think that is that's the starting point. And now we're doing Karma, and now we're in the food waste space. It doesn't necessarily mean that we need to do throughout our whole careers. If we solve it, then we can move on to the next issue.
Yeah.
But I think it's very different from each person. For some people, it might be profits, but maybe that's not a bad thing. If you use that drive to have an impact, maybe that's good.
Yeah, I think it's right. I think the circular economy businesses need to operate ruthlessly to scale, to make sure that their business model addresses as many people as possible. And I think what you see often, until today at least, or not often, but sometimes, if you look at circular economy startups trying to solve a particular maybe niche or doing something very good and being very motivated by the ethical aspects of it, but limiting themselves in acquiring the reach necessary to actually have that impact that they're ultimately looking for. So I would think that those businesses should aim also at maximum scale and find a way of doing that and combining the benefits of their mission, which is their North Star, with the scale that they achieve by reaching really many people rather than just a few.
Do you feel like European policies at the moment are flexible enough to support a startup like yours?
Well, yes and no. So yes, it's good enough. We do business here and it's working and so forth. But Europe is not the perfect place in some areas, right? So I think many companies struggle with the implementation of GDPR and cookie tracking, and it gives you a competitive disadvantage, not necessarily across Europe, but versus the United States, where some policies are different, for example. Or how do you do employee incentivization? How do you transfer shares to staff? How can you incentivize everybody? So some policies are a little complicated, but we're working with them, and everything else I think is great in Europe. We're Western, civilized, a very big economy. The European Union is providing a lot of harmonization legally. Sometimes you see more harmonized legal system across the European Union than you see in the United States, across the states, obviously. So yeah, it's a good place to be in. And the third point, I think also on the capital side, you see now a lot more capital coming into European startups. And also on the investor side, you see people believing in more. So the confidence that you can have very large companies starting out from Europe is there. It's now kind of common sense. So that's clearly also something that's beneficial, that's not kind of a US monopoly.
In our case, we're operating in Sweden, in UK, and in France. And in France, it's the only country where they have, regulatory incentives for retailers to not throw away food. So if a grocery store of a certain size throws away food, they will be fined. And you might think that is a good thing, and maybe it is, but you also need to think about what kind of incentives do that create, actually. Is it net positive? So that's something we're looking into right now. Like, is it a good thing? Because there might be, secondary behaviors if you punish a player in that way for doing a certain thing. And for us, like, creating fear is not necessarily always a good thing. However, what's beneficial about it is that it does increase the awareness. So I think governments can do a lot in that area, but then you need to be very cautious of what do you do in terms of regulations to actually create the behavior you want. So that's in the food waste space. But then if you look at a more general business area for us, we're a Sweden-based company. We have offices in London and Paris as well. But being a Sweden-based company, the stock option program or the regulations around employee incentives are not the most, they're quite punishing, to say the least, actually. And that has been a tough one.
Yeah.
So if that could improve, that would help us immensely, because as we all know, it's about the people, it's about the team, it's about acquiring and retaining the right talent.
Yeah.
And for us as a startup, even though we're growing really well, it's like we need to have really experienced and great people on board, and they need to be incentivized. So the stock option program for anything would be very great if we could look into even further.
Yeah, that sounds very reasonable. I wish I had time to talk to you more about how can platform startups contribute to the creation of more circular societies beyond your own platforms. But very sadly, we are running out of time. So I promised I would wish you happy birthday on stage once more. So happy birthday, Elsa. It was a pleasure to talk
to
you both.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.